Happy New Year, everyone! I am pleased to welcome you to our 2026 State of the Channel address. I know. This is not my real voice.
It's actually me. But don't worry, this channel, despite the use of AI like most YouTubers, will always and forever be produced for humans by humans. Now, normally we would actually discuss what we've learned in 2025. Instead, to save time and energy, we decided to turn it into one of those podcasts that you can hear for yourself.
So sit back, relax, and enjoy this podcast. And remember, RetroCirq Studios LLC will always be produced for humans by humans. SDSDSDSDS. Just kidding.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something a little different. It's a digital media studio that had a very public and I think very painful failure back in 2025.
Right. And what's so interesting here is that instead of just, folding up the tent and quietly disappearing,
They chose to own it, every single step of their miscalculation. This isn't just a postmortem. It's a really fascinating case study in creative correction and, frankly, responsibility.
and that's our mission for you today. We're going to analyze the source material they provided, the internal transcripts, the formal address, and really track this whole year of corrective action.
Yeah.
We're basically dissecting the entire life cycle of this channel, RetroCirq, from its collapse to its very deliberate rebirth as two separate sustainable channels in 2026.
Okay, so let's unpack this. To really get the collapse, we have to start with the original vision, which was pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
RetroCirq wasn't just another archive channel. The creators specifically called it a hosted nostalgia channel. The whole idea was to frame these old retro commercials with a very specific vibe.
That late-night public access energy, that was the term they used.
Exactly. It was an intentional choice. They wanted to be different from just, static upload of an old video.
It was all about adding personality, a performance layer. They had this idea that the material needed a context, and this led to the creation of, well, a whole cast of characters.
Right, the lore-driven hosts.
Yeah.
People like Livy, Nancy, Vivi, and Callie. Their whole job was to be the connective tissue for these ads.
Yeah, to provide some continuity.
Which, on paper, sounds like a pretty smart creative hook. You give static content a story. But this led them straight into what the studio now calls the mime era. It was a chaotic mix of demands, really. First, you had viewers reporting just general confusion.
Not what the channel even was.
Right. Is it a library? Is it a comedy show? And second, and this was, I think, the critical blow, they really disliked the host interruptions over the archival stuff.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. If you came to watch, say, a perfect Super Soaker commercial from 1989, and a host dressed up as some weird character starts talking over the first 10 seconds.
You'd feel betrayed. You'd be annoyed.
You'd be annoyed. It was a total tone mismatch. They were trying to serve two completely different masters in the same house.
That sounds like a classic case of, creative identity diffusion. You end up being okay at two things, but great at nothing, and you just make everyone a little bit unhappy.
Precisely. And that's where it gets really interesting, because that internal conflict, that frustration, it started to spill out into their public face.
It did. These sources confirm this frustration showed up as this rebellious, almost defiant marketing. They called it the sorry, not sorry flashpoint.
Wait a minute. What did that defiance actually look like? Because we see this a lot with indie creators, right?
Yeah.
They try to stand out, but it can backfire.
Oh, it certainly did here.
The characters went from being an enhancement to an obstacle.
An outright obstacle. The audience wasn't clicking play for a mime performance. They were clicking play for the commercial, for the retro content.
We saw this so clearly in that transcript about the Big Taste Burger segment.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of a quick intro, the host's personality just took over. The monologue, the character bits, it consumed most of the runtime. The audience was left thinking, okay, but where's the commercial?
And another detail that really stands out from those internal comms was the aggressive cross-promotion.
Yes.
It just confirms that the host was placed at the absolute center, and the archive material was just sort of the backdrop.
It sounds like a classic case of creative tunnel vision. The artists fell more in love with their frame than the picture inside it.
That is precisely the failure they eventually owned up to. They got so focused on the performance that they fundamentally misunderstood what their audience actually valued.
Which, of course, brings us to the blowback. The feedback starts pouring in, and this is where they made what was maybe their biggest business mistake. How did they handle that first wave of criticism?
Not well. Not at all. And to their credit, the sources are brutally honest about this. As the negative comments grew, the internal reaction was to dig in their heels.
To get defensive.
Defensive, arrogant, and, this is the critical part, they framed all that criticism as the audience just misunderstanding the vision, not as useful data.
Wow. That is the fastest way to lose an audience's trust. When you tell the people who support you that they just don't get it.
Yeah.
So what was the specific admission of responsibility there?
They stated it very plainly, that defensiveness cost them audience trust, and they were, quote, wrong for treating that preference as resistance to the vision.
That's a huge moment of introspection.
It is, because it's not just admitting a creative mistake. It's admitting a relationship mistake with their own community. They basically said, we acted like we knew better than you.
And all that defensiveness was just delaying the inevitable realization that the creative choices they were defending were also, well, bankrupting them.
Exactly. This wasn't just about art. It was an unsustainable business model. The sources say RETROcirq was fully self-funded.
Which is a huge risk.
A massive risk, because when you have hosted content, you're not just uploading a file. You're paying performers, you have costumes, production time on set, and then hours and hours of post-production to edit those performances in.
The costs just explode compared to just digitizing an old tape. It stops feeling like a passion project and starts feeling like running a small TV studio.
It was a huge financial drain, and the documents are very blunt about it. They hit a wall, and it's all summed up in one kind of devastating line. Passion did not override math.
So the end came. August 31st, 2025. RETROcirq officially signed off. And this wasn't just a quiet fade to black.
No, it was a planned exit.
They used their formal address to spell out the exact cause. Creative overextension, financial strain, and that audience misalignment.
It's a calculated decision to stop the bleeding and, finally acknowledge the failure.
And that decision to just stop was the first real step in the learning process. They refused to cling to a model that was clearly broken.
After the sign-off, they went into what they called the pause. This wasn't about quitting. It was a period of recalibration to figure out what was actually realistic, both financially and creatively.
And that reflection led to the split, the creation of two totally distinct channels for 2026.
The strategic pivot. They realized they couldn't serve two different audiences in the same space. It just created conflict.
Right, so they created two lanes.
Okay, let's talk about path one. CIRQ Archives. This seems like the most direct response to all that audience feedback. It launched pretty quickly, December 3, 2025, with a very pure back-to-basics philosophy.
This channel is purely for that part of the audience that felt alienated by the hosts. The people who just wanted the material clean and simple. And the pledge they made was a direct answer to the complaints.
100%. No hosts, no commentary, no interruptions. It's just a dedicated, clean archive.
That's a big move. It shows they were willing to completely abandon the original hosting concept for that audience to win back their trust.
It's the clearest possible signal that they heard the feedback. Maybe they heard it late, but they finally acted on it with a real structural change.
Okay, now for path two, the more complicated one. Studio 3. This one had a bit of a messy start, right? It soft-launched earlier as Annex 3.
It did, back in July 2025, and it was initially focused on really experimental stuff like YTPs.
There was no YTPs or YouTube poops or what? Very chaotic, absurdist video edits.
Yeah, they're designed for novelty, for shock value. It was basically a space for them to test the absolute limits of their editing software. Pure creative chaos.
Which sounds like exactly what got RETROcirq into trouble in the first place. So why did this one survive and become the future?
Because they learned their lesson, it seems. The studio realized that constant, wild novelty was also completely unsustainable. The transcripts show that Studio 3 quickly shifted away from that extreme style and back towards retro commercials. It was a move driven purely by the need for sustainability.
So Studio 3 became the new home for the hosted style, but only if it could operate under really strict discipline constraints.
Exactly. And that led to their new mantra, the UHF philosophy.
I love that branding. It's brilliant. But what does it actually mean for how they operate?
It's brilliant because it sets expectations low, which makes the content easier and cheaper to deliver. The UHF philosophy is all about discipline. It's a deliberate choice to copy old-school UHF television principles.
So like minimal presentation.
Minimal everything. We're talking sparse bumpers, no fancy sets, and a very clear hard line between the content, the commercial, and the framing. It's about being economical by design.
They're building the limitations in from the start.
Yes. They're forcing that internal discipline before they spend a single dollar. The hosting only happens if it's cheap, contained, and fast.
So if Studio 3 is this new, curated, economical lane, they still needed a personality. But obviously the big expensive cast was gone, so who's the new voice?
That responsibility now falls to a single, sole, official broadcast voice. QEWT, the mime, portrayed by Kathy Searle. And QEWT is pronounced cute.
And this is the critical distinction, isn't it? It's a mime, but it's presented as a refinement of the concept, not a full return to what alienated people before.
It's a surgically constrained role. QEWT is defined strictly as a continuity announcer and a framing presence, not a host. The old hosts interrupted, they became the story. QEWT is only there to introduce and conclude the material.
So the key word is restraint.
Absolute restraint. The role is described as observational. It's designed specifically not to get in the way of the content. This one, highly disciplined presence, gives them that bit of personality they want, but it rigidly sticks to that economical UHF philosophy.
They learn that less isn't just more, less is sustainable.
That's it.
That's such a powerful arc. It's a studio that tried to be too big, too ambitious, and was forced by cold, hard math to get smaller, to refocus, and to get crystal clear on what it was doing.
The end result is that the 2026 studio is smaller, clearer, and more realistic. The two lanes, CIRQ Archives for the purists and Studio 3 for the curated experience, they ensure they're actually serving their audience properly. The work goes on because they learn from their mistakes. They're now leaner, quieter, and more honest.
It really shows that even the most creative, passion-driven projects have to bend to financial reality and what the audience actually wants. What we saw here was the tough but necessary act of accepting responsibility for waiting too long to make that correction.
And that raises a really important question for you, the listener. It doesn't matter if you're launching a business or just a creative project. This studio learned discipline through failure. It was forced on them. So the question is, how much of that UHF philosophy, setting clear, sustainable limits and discipline right from the start, should you apply on day one, instead of waiting for rejection or financial ruin to force your hand? That preemptive discipline, that's the real knowledge to take away from this deep dive.
Let's define creative sustainability for a moment. Is it just about maintaining revenue, or is it about maintaining that initial joy, that original intent of the work? The RETROcirq story suggests it's the latter, that knowing when to stop, when to pivot, and when to sharpen your focus. That is often the single greatest act of creative sustainability. It ensures the work continues. It's just sharper now.
And there you have it. RETROcirq Studios 2026 State of the Channel, or rather, channels. For those who decide it's too much, let's just simplify. RETROcirq Studio 3 is the home of RETROcirq Recycled, recontexted commercials hosted by Vanessa as Livy and other characters like Jokes to Jace. Late Night TPs, hosted by Frankie, showcases, you guessed it, YTPs. You'll see appearances by many of your favorite hosts from RETROcirq, and we have someone to be a staff announcer, if you will, cute, spelled QEWT, and she's played by Kathy Searle.
CIRQ Archives, on the other hand, is the channel that showcases old commercials, uncut, no ifs, ands, or buts. We hear you loud and very much clear for wanting to go back to basics, keeping it in the background without any interruptions or alterations of any kind. It's comfort food without the extra spice.
So now you have two choices to watch. Whichever you choose, RETROcirq Studios LLC will always be the brand you trust. There are many production studios, but RETROcirq Studios is at the forefront. So from all of us, Happy New Year, and here's to 2026.